Hopes, dreams, and trauma. What is the cost of a free gift? There are many, many themes covered in Wonder Egg Priority. It's become a trend lately that the series that tackled these incredibly serious topics all have become some of my favorites over the past few years. The correlation between series like Madoka Magica and even one of my own personal favorites, Made in Abyss, is tangible. These mature and powerful themes being hidden behind a series which on the surface appears like it might be cute and wholesome. I began watching Wonder Egg without really knowing anything about it, and I was going into it pretty blind. Despite that, to say it had an impact is an understatement. The overall tone was something definitely off-putting from the start. However, once the See No Evils appeared, these uncomfortable red CGI monsters that represent the bystanders who just let things happen, along with the blur-faced woman who guides them as she hurls an axe towards the first episode's companion, I felt like I just ran face first into a wall. I was not expecting it to take the turn that it did, and especially not that fast. There were actually a few moments where I gasped out of shock because of what was happening. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's step back and take a look at the question that some of you might be having if you haven't seen the series yet. What is Wonder Egg Priority? The story follows Ai, a shut-in who refuses to go to school since her one and only friend, Koito, jumped from the building and ended her own life. At the start of the first episode, a talking insect brings her to an arcade, telling her that there's a gacha machine there, which can give her what she really wants, with the first time being free. She says she doesn't really want anything, but despite this, she goes along with the insect, with him reaffirming that there is something that she wants, a friend. And what she receives was an egg. She soon after finds herself in a dream world which takes the shape of her school, and upon cracking the wonder egg she was given, a girl named Kurumi hatches from it. And while it might make sense that Kurumi is the friend which was alluded to earlier, that's not exactly the case. Ai learns that if she can protect the people who come from the wonder eggs that she received from the hordes of tiny red monsters and the personifications of their own trauma, then she will slowly be able to bring her friend Koito back from the dead. All of which is a little bit heavy on its own, which goes along great with the muted colors in the background for the series. However, all of that is in contrast to the incredibly bright and colorful character designs. This heavy theme, though, is compounded when you learn that each of the people who come from the Wonder Eggs also ended their own lives, and each of the core cast also has a significant trauma that they need to endure themselves. I wanted to take a moment to discuss the main cast of the series to get a bit more understanding of these young girls who are tasked with taking on other people's trauma, all the while still having to deal with their own. Depression, bullying, and suicide. Ai Oto, our protagonist for the series, has heterochromia, in this case meaning that she has one blue eye and one yellow eye, something which led to her being harassed and bullied at school. The first episode shows us a glance at when a girl named Koito transferred into her class, and takes an interest in becoming Ai's friend, something no one had ever done before because she was so different. To Ai, she had been tormented and bullied because she was ugly, later saying that heterochromia was common in cats and dogs, but in a tone which makes it sound unclear whether she's trying to justify it as normal to nature or to present a self-image which has her on the level of animals. However, Koito rejects this, saying she has big, beautiful eyes, and asks why she would ever hide them behind her hair. This pushes Ai's whole worldview against itself. She's been isolated and harassed her entire life. To Ai, this is something that couldn't be accepted. She mentions how she doesn't have any friends and she was bullied for her eyes always. Not a lot, not often, always. But here was Koito saying that they were beautiful. But if her eyes were something to be celebrated, then what has she been suffering for? What was the cause of all the hatred that has been pointed towards her? Was it for no reason? How could that be fair? And if there was another reason, what could it be? Was she just not good enough as a person? Being confronted with a position which trivializes the foundation of your trauma can be really difficult or even painful to go through. Which is why at first we see Ai running away from Koito, in such a panic that she forgets her jacket and umbrella in the rain, and then snaps at her mother before isolating herself to her bedroom. However, Koito does end up getting through and becoming Ai's friend, something which was short-lived as something tragic happens to Koito, and without ever coming to Ai for support, she decides to take her own life, leaving Ai more isolated than ever and feeling resentful or like she wasn't good enough as a friend to have Koito come to her with their feelings so that she might be able to help. There's a general feeling of not being good enough when we look at Ai. and a constant theme in her dialogue follows the idea of changing and no longer being the person that she hates, rather than learning to accept and love herself despite what she's been going through. Isolation, guilt, and desperation. When it comes to Neru, we don't have a whole lot of information on her. We know that she said that she let her sister die, implying there was some kind of choice in the matter. And if the other Wonder Eggs are any clue, it at least sounds like she allowed her sister to commit suicide. We also know that while she says that she loves herself, she's putting her own health on the back burner as she attempts multiple Wonder Eggs at once, resulting in her own hospitalization. She seems in a panic or a rush to revive her sister, which is understandable, but as Uraraka explained, maybe she wants to die too, and that's why she's so fearless. We're going to have to wait to see if there's more to her personality and see if this is true. However, something we definitely have is her seeming lack of understanding of friendships. She is cold and distant at first, however, much like Koito cracked Ai's outer shell, Ai manages to crack through Neru's, and they manage to become friends. Even as she is opening up though, she asks questions about what being friends would be like. What would happen, what would they do, and then what? Giving the sense that she has never had a friend herself before. Despite her hesitance though, once she resolves to be Ai's friend, we do see her slowly giving a smile of relief. Insecurity and not being good enough. I won't get into every Wonder Egg hatchling, but Suzuhara from episode 2 was a definite standout for me. In life, she was a gymnast who was berated and yelled at by her coach, constantly being told that she wasn't good enough, and that any abuse she took was simply tough love. She looks up to Ai for being a shut-in and having spirit strong enough to not go somewhere that she doesn't want to be. Ironically, respecting Ai for one of the parts of herself that she most wants to change. This character parallels Ai in some pretty interesting ways. She tells us that she doesn't have any friends, but most importantly is that she feels like she isn't good enough. She's been conditioned to believe that all of the abuse that she has received is just a result of herself failing as a person or a gymnast, much like Ai feels about her heterochromia. Interestingly though, when Suzuhara mentions that everything that is happening is because they aren't good enough, Ai snaps at her, saying she just wants attention and what she really wants is for someone to find and love her, something she probably noticed for herself once she met Koito. Shame, broken homes, self-harm, and eating disorders. Finally, we have Rika, the ex-idol who has a more than rough personality. She's outwardly selfish and shallow, she's greedy and honestly pretty unbearable at first. She still sees the world through the eyes of an idol, and an entitled one at that. All people should pay for her, looks are all that matters, and there's no reason to believe otherwise. Her father, who she talks about with a lot of love in her voice, taught her that a pretty girl never needs to pay for anything. However, despite the positive view she had of her father, one of the first lines she gives in the show is that adults suck. And we get a glimpse of why she might have this feeling, as she mentions that he ended up getting divorced, and later mentioning that she doesn't like her mother whom she ended up living with, saying that if you scratch her surface, she's all slimy. Ironic since Rika herself puts on a facade over who she really is. Ai mentions after meeting Rika that she seems like a one-girl handshake event, and that follows in how Rika talks, always introducing herself as Rika Kawaii, like kawaii because she's so cute. When talking about Ai's friends, she only cares about how cute they are, and whenever there's an adult man around, she begins to flirt with them or talk about how they look, with Neru even alluding to the idea that because she's an idol, she might have had some, pillow fights with adults. All of that is heavy enough, but when it comes to her actual trauma, it revolves around a girl that Rika calls her wallet, named Chiemi. This is a girl who Rika refuses to acknowledge as her friend, which I guess is technically fair considering they don't really know each other super personally. The only time they ever really met was at handshake events back when Rika was still an idol. Chiemi was obsessed with Rika, something we also saw in Mika and Mako's obsession with idols. Chiemi would line up for handshake events over and over, spending a lot of money in doing so, and Rika originally thought she was just some rich girl. However, one day she saw Chiemi stealing from a shop and then selling the goods that she took, all to afford to be able to see her. In Mika and Mako's version of the story, they also ended up getting sugar daddies to help them pay. Regardless, uncharacteristic of the Rika that we've seen to this point, she actually shows some concern for Chiemi, albeit in a not-so-kind way. The next time she shows up, Rika tells Chiemi that she would never be friends with a fan, let alone someone who was so fat that she'd be embarrassed to be seen together. While harsh, the mentality behind it was to take away her reason to steal and spending all of her money. However, this obviously didn't go as planned. Chiemi took the idea of being too fat to heart and ended up developing an eating disorder. Rika would be told by another fan what happened, and we see her visiting Chiemi's funeral, where she mentions she was just skin and bones, having starved herself to death. This affects Rika in a pretty significant way, and fills her with guilt and shame, where she turns to self-harm, seen through the cuts on her arms, and symbolized in the dream world with her weapons being razor blades. Helplessness, wanting to be accepted, the fear of being different, and the cost of a free gift. Wonder Egg Priority, for all of its bright and colorful character designs, is heavy, dark, and impactful. The themes of everyone carrying their own trauma is extremely strong, and when used in contrast to the cutesy art style, it's just elevated even further. However, there is this interesting contrast being presented in the themes of the show itself, with the core path of each dream event involving hatching a Wonder Egg and helping people through their own trauma. It's interesting that the message being presented by Akka and Ura-Akka is that you can't run from your problems and you have to face them head on. You have to stand and fight. This show managed to surprise and hit me in a way that very few series have. It's a beautiful look at some of the darker realities of the world, especially for adolescents. The truth is, there are people out there who are struggling and dealing with trauma, and while there is definitely the idea that Akka and Ura-Akka present, where you need to stand up for yourself and face things directly, I think that the way that they supplement this idea with the Wonder Eggs themselves really sells the show to me. Remember, each egg was someone who ended their own lives, and now they remain trapped in statues in the dream world. But to these people, it's not themselves who will solve their trauma. To become free, they need to rely on their friends, sending the message that it isn't just about fighting your traumas head on. Sometimes it's also necessary to seek out the help of others. Beyond this, it gives the idea of how ending your own life can pass your own traumas onto those around you. It's the friends of the eggs who are left with the task of enduring danger and trauma to bring them back, and in every case we've seen so far, creating a sense of desperation to do so. These girls are not able to accept the loss and will do anything to get them back, even if it means giving up their own lives in the process. A desperation which Akka and Ura-Akka are more than willing to prey on. After all, while the first one might be free, it tends to be the subsequent instances which will cost you everything. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you want to support me a little bit extra, you can also consider checking out my Patreon through the link in the description. Finally, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at AxelBeats. As always though, a big thank you to our patrons, with the Dai Yokai Brunette Thrasher, Jacob Wiley, Ikerochu, and Iffy Babes, our Yokai Lucifina Akuma and Jamie Heck, and our Hanyo, Anthony Hogan, Kasim Salim, Love the Kiwi, Michael Greco, Randy Mosiman, Savage Camel, and Simon Electric. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, remember to stay excellent.